What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Chase the Sports News. I am your host, Chase Coburn, here with you today. The first 2 days in the first round of March Madness is now officially in the rearview mirror. And look, guys, it lived up to expectations. And last year, there was speculation about whether or not the tournament was never going to be the same, whether or not we were still going to see the upsets and the excitement, because really we didn't see a lot of that last year. There weren't many of these crazy Cinderella stories, right? The year before in 24, we saw Jack Oakey in Oakland, and then we saw DJ Burns and NC State go to the Final Four. We didn't have a story like that last year, and we may not have that this year, but the first round certainly lived up to expectations. It was one of the more entertaining that I can remember, and it was quite a blast to watch. However, I have 3 reactions and takeaways from the round of 64, things that people may not be thinking about here as we officially go into the round of 32 later today. And we got some great teams there, but I also think there's a lot to break down from the round of 64 that can maybe help us predict the rest of the bracket, or also kind of just help us maybe understand the tournament or future seasons in a better way. So you guys will see in just a minute. We're going to break down my 3 key reactions from the round of 64. Please be sure to subscribe, do what you need to do to keep up with the content. It's March Madness. We've got a lot of baseball content coming out this week with the MLB season starting not even a week from now, which is insane to think about. We got NFL draft stuff, NBA as we reach that final 10 to 15 game threshold before the playoffs. So it's quite the time in sports. You guys aren't going to want to miss anything. Please be sure to subscribe and keep up with all of the content we are producing here on Chase the Sports News. The first thing I want to break down, I think the ACC proved that they are not an elite conference, at least in this particular season, from the March Madness tournament. I think already there was, I don't want to say speculation because it's not like you can prove it right or wrong, but there was some kind of wonderings about, is the ACC at that elite level this year? And look, there were some quote unquote excuses that the conference can make, and I'm going to break that down. But if you just look on a results basis, the ACC did not live up to the expectation, which is that they are one of, if not the best basketball program in the country. You look at NC State, they had their first 4 loss to Texas in the SEC, and going into the tournament, they had already lost 4 of 5. So going into it, they didn't look good, and then they didn't live up to expectations in the first 4. Then you look at SMU, they had their first 4 loss to Miami, and they came in having lost 5 of 6. And look, Miami of Ohio, people have heard my take on it, and look, it's over now. Officially, it is now officially over. But that was a team that I thought they could have certainly beaten, a team that had not played a quad 1 team all year. And so I think it was very, very disappointing in that regard for SMU. For Clemson, their first round exit to Iowa, all 9th seeds actually won. That's not one of my takeaways, but just something interesting to note. All 9th seeds did win in this tournament, and Iowa was included in that. That's a Big Ten school that they lost to. They lost to a MAC school, an SEC school. And then UNC, North Carolina, as I did predict, was a first-round exit to VCU. And in that, they blew a 19-point lead in the second half. That game was over until VCU just took over late, and UNC really just couldn't find consistent enough offensive production in overtime and in the latter stages of the second half to pull through. And there's a lot of conversations about Hubert Davis, whether or not he should be fired, because this is now consecutive seasons where we don't even see North Carolina among the pinnacle of college basketball teams in that Sweet 16s, the Elite Eights, the Final Fours. And so it does make you wonder, maybe do they move on? But that is the conversation now. And those are 4 ACC disappointing results and 4 ACC losses in this NCAA tournament. But then not only that, some of the wins were even ugly. I look at Virginia. I was really high on Virginia going into this tournament. They barely hung on against Wright State. Wright State took them toe-to-toe. They were able to score on them. They were able to shoot on them. They were able to spread the ball around. I think Virginia only pulled away with a 9-point win, but it was a much closer game than a 9-point deficit may indicate. And then Duke. Right, Duke, I still think is a national championship favorite, and I think that they were dealing with some injuries, and that's going to be one of the things I talk about in a minute. But they barely hung on against Siena. Siena led by 13 points in the second half. And so it just makes you wonder, were these top teams battle-tested, or were these lower teams just simply not as good? Right, Villanova was 25-8 during the regular season. They're a first-round exit to a Mountain West school. It just makes you wonder, because again, I'm not just putting this on the ACC. The Big East is another conference that I thought was very disappointing. Only 2 teams in the round of 32 is not the expectation for a power conference like the Big East. ACC is going to have 4 teams, because I do want to bring up Miami's win over Missouri. That was a good win. And it was generally a good win for Louisville. I thought South Florida made a lot of unforced errors and missed a lot of bunnies and open shots. They were 5 of 33 from 3-point range, and I thought a lot of those were makeable misses, if that makes sense. It was still an impressive result, don't get me wrong, but I also thought South Florida could have won that game. I just don't think the ACC put together a great showing, and I think especially with Virginia and Duke barely hanging on against some low major basketball programs, it makes you wonder whether or not the ACC, whether they were battle tested in ACC play this year. Now, the one thing I will say is injuries could have also played a part in this disappointment, because I don't think there was a conference collectively in this March Madness tournament that was more beat up than the ACC. I think the whole story for North Carolina would be different in terms of where they were seated, the matchup they were given, and the results of the first round if they had Caleb Wilson healthy. It was no Caleb Williams for North Carolina. It was no Michael Brown for Louisville. They were able to win without him, but still, that could have played a hindrance and maybe why that game was so close. No BJ Edwards for SMU. The committee said that was the only reason why they were in the tournament to begin with. So I guess you can play that both ways. Either A, they're not that good, or B, you just, they didn't have their best players, so there's nothing you could really do. And then no Caleb Foster or Pat Gungba for Duke. And so for all of those disappointing results, many of them you could point to an injury, especially for Caleb Wilson for North Carolina, and no Caleb Foster or Pat Gungba for Duke, and especially no Gungba because Folafak and Doty, they're able to score inside at will without Pat Gungba, and Pat Gungba is one of the best rim protectors in the country. I think the whole story would have been different if he was on the floor. So there was, I mentioned earlier, there was a ton of kind of wonderings about whether the ACC was down this year. I think all things considered, they disappointed in the round of 64. I think, honestly, this all changes every year. We've seen ACC schools consistently go to Final Fours and have that type of success. So it's really nothing to worry about for the long term for the conference. But it's just something kind of interesting to note how the ACC was given, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 bids, and only half of them are moving on, and only 6 of them actually even made it into the field of 64 teams. The second takeaway that I really noticed from this round of 64 is, the best way I could explain it is, mid-majors felt closer than ever before and yet farther away than ever before. Look, there's a conversation of, is the Atlantic 10 a major conference? I kind of put it in that Mountain West Coast Conference tier. It's like a gray area where you can have teams that can consistently get at-large bids, like VCU and St. Louis were both teams with at-large potential had they not won their conference. St. Louis was an at-large. VCU could have been an at-large if they didn't win the A-10. So I guess I'm just saying, for conferences that usually would not have multiple bids in the NCAA tournament, for those mid-major teams, they felt so close this year, but yet so far away when you look at the results. I look at Hofstra. They had Bama fans sweating in the first half. Alabama still pulled away with a big win. Akron had a 5-point game with Texas Tech with 6 minutes left. I think the Red Raiders won by, still 20 points. Furman had a 5-point game with UConn with 5 minutes to go. Huskies still moved on with a double-digit victory. Wright State, they were on the heels of Virginia the whole game. We just broke that down. But Virginia won. McNeese got off to a great start against Vandy until the wheels just fell off for them. Kansas was dominating that game against Cal Baptist, but even Cal Baptist had a 6-point game with 90 seconds to go. Siena, they led by 13 points in the second half against Duke, until Duke was able to come back and win the game. South Florida, I just mentioned them against Louisville. They had Louisville fans sweating toward the end of that game, and they were still 5 of 33 from three-point range. And if they make a few of those, they could actually go on and beat Louisville in the first round and pull off that upset. And so it felt like we were this close. We were so close to having possibly the greatest line of upsets in college basketball history, because all those games that I mentioned had legitimate upset potential when you look at what actually transpired during the game. Maybe, like, again, some of them, not so much, right? Furman never really took a lead against UConn. They just kept it close. Same with Cal Baptist. They just kept it close toward the end. But like South Florida, Siena, McNeese, Wright State, Akron, like these teams had a true chance to pull off some improbable, heroic March Madness type upsets, and they didn't. And we only saw one traditional mid-major, I'll call them, a conference that traditionally wouldn't receive multiple bids, in High Point over Wisconsin as a 12-over-5. But I even think that wasn't as quote-unquote shocking, because though Wisconsin was a really good team this year, I still believe High Point was probably the best mid-major in the whole year when you even look going into the tournament. Led the country in point differential, were one of the nation's leaders in points per game. They were forcing turnovers at a really high level. Like, that's exactly what you want out of a team, and they proved it, and they had a great result against Wisconsin in the round of 64, pulling off that 12-over-5 upset. Even the 11-over-6 upsets were VCU and Texas. Again, conferences that traditionally could and do receive multiple bids into the NCAA tournament. This is certainly not to take away from the fact that we didn't see great games, because number one, all of those games that I mentioned that were nearly upsets were all great games. And we had some great games. Santa Clara, Kentucky was kind of the epitome of March Madness. That game was absolutely insane. It was an electric first round. It's nothing to take away from that. But it's hard to tell whether or not these mid-majors, traditional mid-majors, whether or not they're better or worse than before, whether they're closer or farther apart than before, because I think we had more close calls than ever before. I think we had more teams actually in the running and with the possibility of pulling off an upset that we usually have. But yet we only had one traditional mid-major pull off that upset. And now we have 28 of the 32 remaining teams in the March Madness NCAA tournament coming from the traditional Big Five conferences of the SEC, ACC, Big 10, Big 12, and Big East. And so very, very interesting. And I think now we need to start monitoring the traditional mid-major success in March Madness going forward in the new NIL landscape. Are they going to be able to compete with those top teams? And if not, is there something the NCAA should do to resolve it? Again, a very, very entertaining tournament with multiple upsets. But just as a basketball fan myself, I felt like we were so close to getting even more, and that would have been really, really exciting as a fan. And my third and final big takeaway from the round of 64, which is more so going into the round of 32, I think this round of 32 is set up to be one of the best we've seen in a very long time. Shout out John Rothstein of CBS Sports. I think he is one of the best broadcasters out there covering college basketball. Huge shout out, John. But he said when the tournament bracket was revealed that it's going to be like a filet mignon in the round of 32. And now that the dust has settled and the results are in for the round of 64, he's not wrong. This is going to be an electric round of 32. Already just looking in the East region, we called it the coaches region for a reason. You have Rick Pitino versus Bill Self, St. John's versus Kansas in a 4-5. That's going to be electric. Then you have Dan Hurley versus Nick Cronin. I think UConn, UCLA is going to go back and forth. I may pick UCLA in that game. I like the way they've been playing. UConn's been so inconsistent all year. I think UConn will still win, but that's going to be a great game between two electric head coaches. Vandy, Nebraska is one of those games. It's just impossible to pick. Both teams playing so well. VCU, Illinois, I think is also interesting. Illinois is playing really well right now. However, VCU, are they going to make a Cinderella run? Are they going to be the Cinderella and the darlings of this March Madness NCAA tournament? I think the hardest one of the entire bracket to pick is Virginia versus Tennessee, two really good defensive teams. That's a battle. And then you even have Alabama, Texas Tech. Both teams can shoot. That's going to be a high-scoring game. I just think for as fun as the upsets are, there were so many games in the round of 64, as expected, when you have all seeds 1 through 4 still alive and advancing. A lot of those games were chalk, and a lot of those games were complete blowouts. But I think maybe we're going to see a different story here in the round of 32. We only have one, again, traditional team from a traditional mid-major conference in the round of 32. So are we going to have some of those Cinderellas? I don't know, but I think with all seeds 1 through 4 and 3 of the top 5 seeds as well, or 3 of the 5th seeds also alive, with essentially almost like 19 of the top 20 teams in the country in the pre-tournament seeding still alive here going into the round of 32, I think we're set up to watch some of the best teams do it out. And I think it's going to be pure cinema in the March Madness tournament. And I don't know if it's a guarantee that it's going to be all one seeds there, but I think there is also an element of chalk isn't always a bad thing in this tournament, because I think we are still going to have an electric setting of March Madness basketball. And this round of 32, I think, is going to exceed the expectations that fans may be setting after an electric round of 64. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this edition of Chase's Sports News. Just some quick round of 64 reactions, and we're so excited for the next 2 days of March Madness men's and women's basketball, and then it's going to be next weekend, and then the weekend after. It's one of the best times of year. And then, of course, guys, we got MLB content coming soon, NBA content, NFL draft content. There's so much coming soon that you're not going to want to miss. So please be sure to subscribe, do what you need to do to keep up with the content. And we would love for you guys to go along for the journey. The support has been incredible over these past few weeks, and I can't thank you guys enough. So please be sure to subscribe and keep up with all of the content that is coming soon. Signing off, I'm your host, Chase Coburn, saying so long from Chase's Sports News.